This is a story of who we were, how we got here.
Houston, the Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility.
And where we are going.
You've got mail.
So join us as we take history off the page.
Hey everybody, just a quick shout out to let you know that after a fun summer of a little bit of sun and definitely a lot of research, History Off the Page will be back with new episodes starting September 14th. Our first new episode will be about the emergence of the New Woman in the 1920s, and more broadly covers changing expectations about gender in 1920s Europe. We'll go over early feminism and the suffragette movement, talk about how the experiences of World War I opened up new possibilities and mindsets for European women. And just for fun, we'll also explore the life of the French fashion designer Coco Chanel. If you don't know much about Coco, she's a really fascinating figure, a kind of rags to riches story where she ended up revolutionizing fashion. She's generally credited as being the one that invented, for example, the little black dress. And of course, some of you may know her through her famous fragrance, Chanel No. 5. So in many ways, Coco Chanel opened new doors for women in the 1920s. Of course, there's also a tragic side to her story as well. As we'll discuss in the episode, she later became involved with the Nazis. She got involved in a lawsuit where basically she was trying to take advantage of the Jewish identity of some of her partners, but we'll get into that more in the particular episode. As if that drama is not enough for you, the musical intro will be from Taylor Swift, so you Swifties out there will definitely not want to miss it. Which Taylor Swift song did I decide to use? Ha 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 ha. Okay. After the episode on the New Woman, we'll conclude our series on modernity with a slightly shorter lecture on changes to sexuality and sexual identity in the same period. Basically, the short version of the story is that before about 1900, most people did not actually connect sexual preference with the idea of identity. One did not think of oneself as being homosexual or heterosexual. One just had certain preferences, which one might give into in certain circumstances. To make a kind of absurd analogy, it's a bit like saying that although some people might find blonde partners particularly attractive, no one would ever identify themselves as being a quote-unquote blonditarian. And of course you wouldn't say this because no one believes that an attraction to blondes has any kind of effect on the rest of your personality. It doesn't limit potential other choices. It doesn't reflect on your sort of inner nature, right? We don't identify it with identity. We don't feel sympathy for other people who maybe prefer blondes. We don't say, oh, I'm like that person just because of this one trait. So again, before 1900, very few people feel this way in terms of sexual preferences. But for reasons that we'll explain in the episode, this starts to change around 1900 as sexual preference becomes an identity. Now, of course, sexual identity is a big topic of debate. It's a core part of kind of modern politics. So for those of you that are interested in the subject more broadly, I think you'll find this sort of historical development and evolution to be quite fascinating. And who better to introduce the topic than, of course, Lady Gaga and her song Born This Way. After that, we'll finally leave modernity behind. We'll start to get into the later 1920s and early 1930s. And the topic that we're really going to spend the most time on this year will be fascism. We're going to start by talking about its emergence in Italy and its development in Italy, and then later on we'll move to a more specific case of fascism, and we'll talk about Nazi Germany. We'll cover fascism from all different angles. We'll get into kind of the basic political questions that have fascinated historians and the public alike for generations. Where on earth does fascism come from? How and why did it emerge, and why did people kind of fall in line behind it? Why did they believe in it? How did these movements take power? And how did they build powerful dictatorships once they were in power? How could anyone listen to Adolf Hitler and think that guy should be in charge of the country. We'll also look at the social side of things and again, try to get not just at the question of, okay, who are the politicians? Who are the key kind of leaders? What are the major kind of milestones in terms of building a dictatorship, structures of power, etc.? But we also want to focus on the social side of it. Why did ordinary people join the movement? Why did they become fascists? Finally, we hope to close things out with a couple episodes on World War II and, of course, the Holocaust. And our goal is to start sort of publicly dropping the first fascist episode, or I should say the first episode on fascism. We don't have fascist episodes here. But the goal is to drop the first one on or around October 1st. Those of you that have followed the podcast for a while, you know we sort of set these deadlines, these goals, and then sometimes we make them, sometimes as academics we kind of get sucked into other projects, other responsibilities. But the goal is to start doing this around October 1st. Now, there are some other developments related to the podcast that I'd like to make you aware of, including some ways to support the show, as well as some new fun activities that we'll be kind of toying around with this year. First, if you can't wait to hear the next episode of History Off the Page, you can get early access to the episodes by becoming a supporter of the show on Patreon. Patreon, which is spelled Patreon, is a creator website that helps crowdfund content creators like myself, and so it's just a really great way, again, to support the show. As I've mentioned a couple times, there are some expenses in terms of the recording software, in terms of hosting files for the show. So in order to keep this accessible, in order to keep producing the episodes, we do need a little bit of support from the public. It's very helpful and very much appreciated. So if you go on Patreon, for the low price of just $5 a month, I'll make the episodes available 2 weeks in advance to you as, again, a way of saying kind of thank you. It's also a great way just to support the show. If you don't want to contribute $5 a month, there's an option just to contribute $2 a month. That's less than the cost of a cup of coffee. If you're enjoying the show, it really helps us and we greatly appreciate it. If you're driving, if you don't have a pen handy, I'll post a link to it on our website, www.historyoffthepage.com. Or if you happen to be listening to us on the Spotify app, they've come up with a new idea, which is kind of great. There's a little button at the bottom of the app that says support the show. You just click on that and it will take you directly to the Patreon site so that you can help us out. Right now, as I'm recording this on September 7th, the New Woman episode is currently available for folks that are supporting the show. For the rest of you, as I said, it'll be released for free on September 14th. The episode I mentioned about sexuality with the Lady Gaga song Born This Way, that will be available to our supporters on Patreon on September 14th, so just a couple days from now. Now, another new thing that Spotify has made available, which is kind of neat, is there is now a Q&A function. So again, if you're listening to us on Spotify, you go down to the bottom of the episode page, you will find a little section where you can insert questions, and then I can come and answer them as I'm able to do. As I said, I have other responsibilities. I'm a full-time professor, but I know that many of you have questions, especially as we get into some of these more complicated topics, some of the more important topics like fascism. I know that you're going to have a lot of questions about it. So go to Spotify, just post a question there, and again, I will try to answer it as soon as I'm able to. Finally, I just want to note a couple of fun items that we'll be playing around with this semester. First, I know that since you listen to History Off the Page, you love combining learning and entertainment. And so I'm going to start adding a monthly recommendation episode that will discuss at least one book and one movie that I think you'll find interesting or valuable. As you know, I make a lot of cultural references on the show. I will probably start posting some movies that are related to history that I think you'll find interesting or that might even enhance some of the content that we're talking about on the show. I may also discuss some of the books that I think are most relevant to some of the topics that help us kind of get an insight into the bigger picture that we're talking about. Some are kind of secondary sources that will be historians, political scientists talking about historical events. Others are going to be primary sources. They're going to be talking about specific experiences that people have had over time that give us sort of a valuable insight into not only the past, but especially the present day. I imagine that these episodes are probably going to be pretty short. I'll probably just describe the book or the movie a little bit, talk about some of the reasons that I think they're worth watching or reading. I may even do an episode on The Patriot, the Mel Gibson movie from 2000, which is one of the worst movies that I've ever seen from a historical perspective. But we'll be sure and have a lot of fun with that. The second thing is that, as some of you already know, we are on social media. This year, we are trying to become more active on Instagram. And I actually have a student intern who will be producing reels that include historical imagery. Basically, he spent the whole summer combing through old magazines, newspapers, and things like that to kind of uncover interesting pictures, interesting details, moments from history. And so he's put those together into some thematic reels, and he's been posting those on Instagram. If you're not sure how to find us on Instagram, I'll put up a link again on the website. It's www.instagram.com, history space off space the space page. So once again, that's history space off space the space page. Again, I'll post links to all this on the website. It's one of the unfortunate side effects of basically doing this as an audio format. Obviously, I can't just give you the links directly. Anyway, clearly we have a lot going on, a very ambitious semester ahead of us. We're excited to have you with us, and we hope you'll join us next time as we take history off the page.